She said it so softly that the wind almost stole the words from her mouth. "I'm not pretty." They slipped out while her eyes stayed fixed on the dirt road, the one that cut through the dry land like a scar that never healed. The ranch smelled of dust, leather, and old wood baked under the sun for decades, and she stood there like someone who had learned long ago not to take up space. Her dress was plain, her shoes worn thin at the heel, and her hands were rough in a way that told stories no one had ever asked her to tell. She had come because she had nowhere else to go, because the town whispered too loudly about women who were alone, and because desperation sometimes pushes people toward places they never imagined. The cowboy leaned against the fence, hat shadowing his eyes, quiet in the way men become when they've seen life strip things down to essentials. He didn't look at her face right away. He looked at her hands. He looked at how she stood, like she was bracing for a blow that never came. The silence stretched, not cruel, not awkward, just real. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, unpolished, and certain. "That's fine," he said. "I need honest, not fancy." And in that moment something shifted. Not the world, not her past. Just the air between two people who weren't pretending anymore. The ranch had no patience for lies. The sun rose early and unforgiving. The work demanded hands that showed up whether the heart was ready or not. She learned quickly that out here, effort mattered more than beauty, and silence was not emptiness but respect. He didn't ask about her past, and she didn't offer it. They existed side by side like two weathered posts holding up the same fence, each carrying their own weight. She cooked meals that were simple but warm, swept floors that had never been meant to shine, and listened to the land at night when loneliness tried to crawl back into her chest. He watched her without staring, noticed the way she flinched when voices grew loud, the way she relaxed when animals trusted her. The cowboy had learned long ago that people who survive hard lives move differently. They don't demand attention. They earn it slowly, and in the quiet rhythm of shared work, something deeper than attraction began to form, recognition. She wasn't trying to be anything. She just was. And to a man tired of polished smiles and empty promises, that honesty felt rare enough to protect. One evening, as the sky burned orange and purple, she finally spoke again, not about beauty but about worth. She said she'd spent her life being measured by mirrors and found lacking every time. The cowboy listened, hat in his hands now, eyes clear and unguarded. He told her that the land never asks if you're pretty before it lets you belong. It asks if you'll stay, if you'll work, if you'll endure. The words settled into her slowly, like seeds finding soil they'd been waiting for. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like something temporary. The ranch didn't promise happiness. Neither did he, but it offered truth, and for someone who had been starved of it, that was enough to take the first real breath of her life. Change never arrives with noise when it's real. It comes quietly, like her laughter one morning when the coffee burned and he teased her for once, or the way he started setting aside the softer work for days, when her hands cracked and bled. She didn't become beautiful overnight, not in the way the world defines it. But something in her posture shifted. She stood taller. She met his eyes. She stopped apologizing for existing. The cowboy noticed, of course. He noticed everything. He had built his life on paying attention, watching clouds for storms, cattle for illness, people for truth. And the truth was this: the more she became herself, the more she filled the space around her. Not loudly, not dramatically, but fully. The ranch felt different with her in it, like a house finally lived in instead of merely used. The past, however, never stays buried forever. When it came for her, it came through old names and cruel memories, through voices that reminded her of who she had been told she was. She nearly left one night without a word, convinced she was a burden, convinced that peace was something she borrowed, not owned. He found her at the fence before dawn, bag in hand, eyes hollow with fear. He didn't stop her with promises or romance. He stopped her with truth. He told her she didn't owe him beauty, gratitude, or perfection. She owed only honesty to him and finally to herself. And when she cried, it wasn't the breaking kind. It was the kind that washes dust from tired eyes. By the time the seasons turned, the ranch no longer felt like a refuge, it felt like home. Not because he saved her, but because she learned she didn't need saving. The cowboy never told her she was beautiful in the way she expected. Instead, he told her she was steady, capable, real. And when he finally did look at her one evening and say she was beautiful, it landed differently. It wasn't a verdict, it was a recognition. She smiled then, not shy, not unsure. The girl who once whispered, "I'm not pretty," had become a woman who no longer needed the answer. And the cowboy? He got exactly what he asked for. Not fancy, just honest. And that, it turned out, was everything. The ranch didn't change when love arrived, but everything felt heavier in a good way. Like the land itself had decided to trust them both. Mornings came with shared silence, not empty but full. The kind that doesn't need filling. She no longer moved like a guest. Her steps belonged to the house, to the porch boards that remembered her weight, to the kitchen where her hands knew exactly where everything lived. The cowboy watched her from a distance, not guarding, not claiming, just witnessing. He had never believed in grand turning points, only in slow proof, and she had become proof without trying. The way she cared for injured animals, the way she listened before speaking, the way she stayed even when staying was hard, these things mattered more than words. And yet, there were moments when fear still crept into her chest, whispering that this life was borrowed, that people like her didn't get to keep good things. She hid those thoughts well, but not well enough. He had learned that strength often wears quiet disguises, and that the strongest people are usually the ones most afraid of being seen. The test came not with drama, but with choice. An opportunity arrived for him. Land expansion, money, a future that looked impressive on paper and empty in the heart. It would mean leaving the ranch for months, maybe longer. Leaving her alone with doubts she was still learning to silence. He didn't ask her to wait. He didn't promise anything. He simply told her the truth, raw and unpolished. That he wanted a life built on what they had here, not one decorated for outsiders. That he had spent years mistaking survival for living. The words scared her more than any rejection ever had, because they asked her to believe she was chosen, not settled for. Loving someone who had never felt worthy of love is a quiet kind of courage. She told him she was afraid, not of being left, but of being believed in. And he answered the only way he knew how, by staying. Time did what time always does. It revealed what was real. She grew into herself fully, not beautifully by mirrors, but solidly by truth. The past loosened its grip. The voice that once told her she was small began to fade, replaced by something steadier, kinder. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the land glowed, the way it only does when it forgives everything, she said it again, but this time differently. "I used to think not being pretty meant I didn't matter." The cowboy didn't correct her. He didn't rush to reassure. He just took her hand, rough palm against steady skin, and said that the world confuses shine with value, noise with worth. What lasts, he told her, is what stays honest when no one is watching. She smiled, not because she needed approval, but because she finally understood. She wasn't pretty. She was real. And the cowboy had never needed anything else. Love, when it is real, doesn't make life easier. It makes it truer. And truth has weight. The ranch began to feel smaller as their bond grew, not because it lacked space, but because the world outside started knocking again. Neighbors noticed the change in her first. The way she spoke without shrinking. The way she stood beside the cowboy, not behind him. Some smiles were kind. Others were sharp. People who had once dismissed her now studied her like a puzzle they didn't approve of being solved. Old judgments resurfaced, whispered comparisons, familiar cruelty dressed up as concern. She heard them, every word, and for a moment the past tried to pull her backward. She wondered if honesty was only safe in isolation. If love could survive being seen, the cowboy said nothing at first. He had learned that battles aren't always loud, and that sometimes the most important stand is simply not moving. The breaking point came quietly, the way most real ones do. A gathering in town, faces from before, eyes that remembered her weakness better than her growth. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else said her old words for her, mocking, "I'm not pretty," as if it was still a confession instead of a scar. The room froze. She felt herself folding inward, years of shame rushing back like muscle memory. But before she could disappear, the cowboy spoke, not angrily, not defensively but firmly, like a man naming a fact. He said beauty was never the promise here. He said he chose her because she stayed honest when the world rewarded pretending. He said the ranch stood because of hands like hers, hearts like hers, people who don't sparkle but endure. No speeches, no drama, just truth placed carefully where lies had lived too long. And something extraordinary happened. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She stood. That night, back under the wide, forgiving sky, she realized something had finally ended. Not the fear completely, but its control. She told him she didn't need protection anymore, only partnership. He smiled at that, slow and proud, because it was exactly what he had hoped for without daring to ask. Love, she learned, wasn't about being chosen once. It was about being chosen again when things were uncomfortable, when honesty made people uneasy, when staying meant standing exposed. The ranch slept peacefully around them, land holding secrets, stars keeping watch. She was no longer the woman who whispered her worth into the dirt. She was someone who could carry it openly, even when others tried to take it away. And the cowboy knew then, with the certainty of a man who had waited his whole life for something real, that whatever came next, they would meet it standing side by side.